Mercedes just turned the first race of 2026 into a warning shot, and the scary part is, they may not have shown everything yet. George Russell delivered pole, Kimi Antonelli completed the 1-2, and suddenly the new era already feels like it belongs to the silver cars. That alone would have been enough to shake the paddock. But the part that really matters is not the result on paper, it is the feeling Melbourne left behind, that Mercedes were not only fast, they were operating with a level of control the rest of the grid could not match. And once you look past the finish order, the picture gets even more dangerous. Ferrari were close enough to stop this from becoming a simple story about one team crushing everyone else. Charles Leclerc attacked early, Lewis Hamilton stayed in the fight, and for a brief stretch, Mercedes had to respond instead of cruise. That is what made this weekend so revealing. This was not just about a quick car or a strong power unit. The pace was coming from a full package that looked settled far earlier than most people expected. The real story was never about the lap time. It was about why Mercedes could unlock speed that even their own customer teams could not seem to reach. And that is where the whole thing becomes far more serious for the rest of the field. McLaren, Alpine, and Williams all had Mercedes power, yet none of them looked remotely close to what the works team produced. Ferrari looked like the only team with a real route into this fight, while the Mercedes customers looked like they were still trying to decode a package their supplier had already mastered. So before anyone decides this season is already slipping away from the rest, there is one question that has to be answered first. What actually made Mercedes look so strong on race day? Sunday looked simple when you checked the final order, but the race itself told a far messier story. Mercedes finished first and second, yet the front of this Grand Prix was not calm in the opening phase. Charles Leclerc got the jump and put George Russell under immediate pressure, while Lewis Hamilton stayed close enough to keep the lead group tight and tense. That changed the whole feel of the race. Mercedes were not coasting away from the field, they were being forced to answer real pressure, real attacks, and real early questions about whether their pace would actually hold once the race settled into rhythm. That is why the key moment was not the finish, it was the split in strategy when the virtual safety car arrived. Mercedes brought Russell and Kimi Antonelli in, committed to the hard tire, and backed themselves to carry that choice all the way to the flag. Ferrari stayed out, hoping track position and later opportunities would keep the fight alive. For a few laps, that call kept the pressure on the leaders. Then the race began to swing. Mercedes had clean air, control of the pit window, and a tire plan that turned one decision into total command. Nobody in that garage expected what came next, because once Ferrari finally stopped, the shape of the race had changed for good. The gap had opened, the early fight had gone, and what looked like a straight fight at the front suddenly became a chase Ferrari could not fully restart. That is what makes this result so important. Mercedes did win with authority, but the race was not born dominant from the first lap. It became dominant because they handled the turning point better than everyone else. And once that much is clear, the next question becomes even more uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Where exactly was Mercedes really finding that extra speed? Mercedes did not look devastating in Melbourne because the power unit alone was stronger. They looked devastating because the whole car was working together in a way nobody else had fully unlocked yet. George Russell's pole lap was not just quick, it was clean, stable, and brutally efficient across the lap. And that is what made it so worrying for the rest of the grid. This was not one of those weekends where a team survives on straight line speed and hangs on through the corners. Mercedes looked calm in every phase of the lap, and that usually means the advantage runs deeper than one headline explanation. Russell's pole time of 1.18.518 put him 0.293 clear of Kimi Antonelli, and almost 0.8 ahead of third placed Isaac Hadjar, which tells you how complete that car looked in qualifying trim. The most important part was not just the final gap, it was how Mercedes carried speed without looking nervous or overworked. Their car seemed able to stay strong through the corners and still keep enough energy for the next straight, which is exactly the kind of balanced teams spend months trying to build. That is why the early fear around Melbourne was so real. Mercedes were not only fast, yes, they already looked comfortable with the demands of this new rules package, and that should make every customer team uneasy, because this kind of pace is much harder to copy than people think. A works team can shape the full package around its own understanding from the start, while the customer teams are still trying to catch up with how to use every part of that system properly. So the gap was not just about one fast Saturday or one smart Start Sunday, it pointed to a car and team combination that already knew where the time was hiding. And once that becomes clear, the spotlight moves straight to the teams using the same Mercedes power but getting nowhere near the same result. The most uncomfortable part of Mercedes' Melbourne win was not what the works team did at the front. Well, it was what their own customer teams could not do with the same badge on the back of the car. McLaren, Alpine, and Williams all arrived with Mercedes power, yet none of them looked remotely like a shadow of the team that won the race. That is what turned one strong weekend into a much bigger story. If the engine was the whole answer, the gap should not have looked this brutal. Instead, Mercedes stood alone, and their own customers looked like they were reading from a different script entirely. McLaren had flashes of speed, but flashes do not save you when the race exposes what is missing. Alpine dragged itself into the points fight through effort more than control, and Williams never looked like a car that could lean on the same strengths Mercedes were showing at the front. That is the detail that matters here. Customer teams can receive the same power unit, but they do not receive the same level of understanding, the same preparation window, or the same harmony between every part of the package. What no broadcast covered is this: the real divide was not hardware alone. It was how completely Mercedes already knew how to use it. That leaves the customer teams in a dangerous place early in the season. They are not chasing some random one-lap miracle from Russell or one perfect weekend from Antonelli. They are chasing a complete operating model that Mercedes already seemed to trust under pressure. McLaren still have enough pace to believe they can recover, and that keeps them in the fight, but Melbourne made it clear that belief alone will not close this gap. While those teams search for answers, one rival looks far more ready to strike right now. And that shifts the whole story toward Ferrari. Ferrari did not leave Melbourne looking beaten, they left looking dangerous. That is the part many people rushed past after Mercedes locked out the top two. Charles Leclerc did not just hang around in the early laps, he attacked, took the lead, and showed that Ferrari had enough pace to make Russell fight for this win instead of simply collecting it. Lewis Hamilton backed that up by staying close enough to keep the pressure alive at the front. So while the final result gave Mercedes the headline, Ferrari left Australia with something that may matter even more over a full season, proof that their car belongs in this battle. The strongest sign came before the race had even settled down. Ferrari topped first practice, then came alive again when the lights went out. Audi with Leclerc jumping into the lead and Hamilton moving into the top group straight away. After the race, Leclerc said the team delivered at the start and called third place the best they could do on the day, while Hamilton said he felt great in the car and even wished the race had gone longer. Those are not the words of a team that thinks it is chasing from too far back. They are the words of a team that believes the gap is real, but also reachable. That is why Ferrari may be a bigger problem for Mercedes than the customer teams are right now. McLaren, Alpine, and Williams still look like they are trying to understand their package, but Ferrari already look ready to attack with a car that has real race pace, strong launches, and enough confidence to stay in the fight when the pressure rises. The result in Melbourne did not close this story, it opened it. Because if Ferrari were this close on a weekend that still ended in a Mercedes 1-2, then the next question becomes impossible to ignore. Was Albert Park showing the true order, or was it showing a track that simply suited Mercedes more than anyone else? Albert Park may have shown Mercedes at their strongest possible shape, and that is exactly why the rest of the grid cannot afford to read this result too simply. A 1-2 finish makes it easy to believe the order is already fixed. But tracks do not tell the truth in the same way. Some circuits expose weakness, some hide it, and some hand a well-prepared team the perfect stage to look even stronger than they really are. Melbourne gave Mercedes long sections where a settled car and clean energy use could keep paying them back, lap after lap, and that is what makes this opening result far more complicated than the final standings suggest. Ferrari are the team that make this question impossible to ignore. They were close enough in the race to suggest that on a different kind of circuit, one that puts more stress on braking zones, rotation, and a different balance across the lap, the picture may not stay this comfortable for Mercedes. That is why Melbourne matters, but also why it can mislead. The same weekend that made Russell look like the clear early benchmark also gave Ferrari reasons to believe the gap is not locked in. This is the part that changes everything. The first race may have revealed strength, but it may also have exaggerated where that strength hits hardest. That is a dangerous thought for Mercedes, and a hopeful one for everyone chasing them. If Albert Park amplified their best qualities, then the next races become something much bigger than a normal early season follow-up. They become a test of whether this advantage travels cleanly, or whether the field can start dragging Mercedes back into a real fight. Ferrari will believe that moment is coming. McLaren will hope it arrives before too much damage is done. And once you look beyond the front two teams, the wider paddock starts revealing just how unstable and unforgiving this new era already looks. Mercedes and Ferrari owned the spotlight in Melbourne, but the rest of the paddock was throwing out warnings that could shape this season just as much as the fight at the front. Red Bull lost Isaac Hadjar during the race after he had already put himself in a strong position on Saturday, and Max Verstappen never even got the clean weekend he needed after crashing in qualifying. Cadillac had one car retire and the other finished deep in the order. Aston Martin looked fragile all weekend. Suddenly the first race stopped feeling like a simple battle for victory and started looking like a survival test for teams still trying to understand what this new era really demands. That wider chaos matters because it changes how we read Mercedes and Ferrari too. A team can look quick in one session, then fall apart when reliability, balance, tire life, or race management come under real pressure. McLaren felt that pain in a different way. Oscar Piastri showed pace in practice, but the weekend slipped away before it could become a proper statement, while Lando Norris could only limit the damage. What no broadcast covered is this: the field was not just slower than Mercedes. Much of the field still looked unfinished. Some teams were chasing speed, some were chasing stability, and some were just trying to get through the weekend without exposing deeper flaws. That is why Melbourne should worry the entire grid, not only the teams that lost points on Sunday. Mercedes leave Australia with a result that says they are ready now. Ferrari leave knowing they can fight, but several others leave with problems that are bigger than one bad strategy or one poor lap, because their foundation still looks shaky under pressure. And once that becomes obvious, the first race gives us a much sharper answer to the biggest question of all: who actually leaves Melbourne in the strongest position, and who should already be worried about what comes next? Melbourne did not prove that Mercedes have already locked up 2026. It proved something more unsettling for everyone chasing them. They were the team that arrived most complete, most prepared, and most ready to turn a new rules era into immediate results. George Russell took the win like a driver who knows this could be the season that changes his place in the sport, and Kimi Antonelli made the result even heavier by finishing the job beside him. Ferrari showed enough to stay in the fight, but Mercedes leave the first round with the one thing every rival wanted to deny them: early control of the championship story. That is what makes the customer team problem so serious and Ferrari's pace so important at the same time. McLaren, Alpine, and Williams now have to figure out why the same power unit is producing such different outcomes, while Ferrari can focus on something far more dangerous for Mercedes: how to turn close pace into race-winning pressure. The real story was never about one clean opening weekend or one flattering circuit. It was about which team looked like it already understood the demands of this new era from the first green light. Right now, that team is Mercedes, and everybody else is being forced to react to the standard they just set. But this first race also refused to give us a simple ending. Ferrari are too close to ignore. McLaren still have too much talent to stay quiet forever. Red Bull, Aston Martin, us, and the rest of the field already know that one weak weekend in a season like this can expose much deeper cracks. So the opening round gave Mercedes the result, yet it also gave the whole paddock a target, a benchmark, and a problem that now follows them into every garage on the calendar. Melbourne was not the final answer. It was the first warning.